So if I was using these restaurant doors in a class, say on Islam in West Africa, or Sufism, or Black Atlantic religious movements even, one of the things that I would stress is the way in which Sufism, or tasawwuf, provides a means for collective identity, for collective movement, and stands as a sort of visual representation of a commitment to that movement. And one of the, I think it's important to say when I use the term movement, I use it in a number of ways, right? So I'm thinking about movement in terms of, in an organizational sense, but also in a migrational sense, right? Because migration, like, you know, migration is a very important component of the human story, and certainly for people of African descent. But Sufi movements, particularly in the West African context, particularly and specifically in Senegal's history, is one that has facilitated not just a means or a mechanism for personal piety, but one that has allowed for people to maintain a certain sense of, I guess you could say, Pan-African, pro-Black identity in the midst of, in spite of French colonial narratives about who Africans were. And so depictions like these, powerful imagery like what we see here, are such that they provide a reminder of this, right? There's a kind of almost a kind of immortality or a kind of an ongoing presence, if you will, that these images like this offer. One of the other things that I think is important to note is the Arabic inscriptions at the bottom that name Sheikh Amadou Bamba, Khadim al-Rasul, or Sheikh Ibra, Bab al-Muradiya. I believe that's what that says. Yes. The door of the Muradiya, or the door through which one accessed the Muradiya. And that being Sheikh Ibra's namesake, right? Him being a kind of, again, a protege and foremost disciple of Sheikh Amadou Bamba. And Sheikh Amadou Bamba being known as Khadim al-Rasul, the servant of the messenger, right? Noting this sort of commitment to being a follower, being a commitment to righteousness through not servitude, but rather service, through one's labor. In Arabic, there's a word, khidma, which means basically labor or service that one pays for the sake of elevating oneself, right? One humbles oneself or lowers oneself in order to be elevated spiritually. And this operates much differently than how we might think about labor in the context of the Black Atlantic, where Africans and people of African descent were made and forced to labor to serve the economic interests of colonial powers. But this is a much different approach to labor. This is a much different approach to human and we could say racial uplift through this kind of movement. And so we think about movement in an organizational sense, we think about movement in a migrational sense, but we also think about movement in a spiritual sense, right? And so this is a kind of trifold way in which we can understand movement of the body, but also movement of the soul, and also collective movement in doing so.